Hello, everyone. Whew, it's exciting to be able to be up here and talk to you, because actually, in this idea of the failure of success, reimagining your purpose, I have a public speaking fear. So to be able to stand up here and have a conversation with you is more an opportunity for me to have a conversation with myself. So if you'd bear with me for a little bit, I want to have a self-talk. I want to think about this idea of failure that many of us have been taught to stray away from, to be afraid of, to be concerned about, and to maybe give us some permissions to fail. But not to stay in that failure, but rather to use failure as an opportunity to succeed. Failure is intertwined with success. I believe you can't have success without failure. And yet, we are so often told, don't you dare fail. If you fail, you should hide off in a back room somewhere, or if you fail, something is wrong with you. But failure is important because it's part of the process. It's part of the journey. And for me, because I do social justice work, it's in part of my purpose. And so I have to learn how to fail, and fail well, I guess. And as I'll talk about later, learn to fail up. So if you will with me, just let me talk myself through. This is motivation for me too. So I ask myself a question on a regular basis. Why am I here? Well, why am I here on earth, you might ask? Why am I here today on this stage? Why am I here at Colby? Why am I here? I love questions, clearly. But they're important questions because they get me closer to my purpose. I've read a lot of self-help books because I'm constantly trying to figure out, what am I supposed to be doing with my life? What am I supposed to be giving to others? What is my journey supposed to be like? Well, I have to say that those self-help books really haven't helped me much. But I keep trying anyway. And with those self-help books, they've also taught me that because we don't talk about failure enough, that I really don't know how to fail, or I don't know what should happen after I fail, or as a result of me not failing, what am I missing out on? So I thought about this question, are you afraid to fail? And the answer for me is yes. Not only am I afraid to fail, I'm afraid of lots of things. I'm afraid of flying, I'm afraid of doctors with dirty hands, I'm afraid of lots of things that are quite rational and maybe quite irrational as well. But in that question, I had to ask, if I'm afraid to fail, does that mean that I'm actually missing out on the purpose that I have on my life? So ask yourself, are you afraid to fail? Are you the person who's supposed to find the cure? You name it, the cure for cancer, cure for AIDS, cure for any kind of disease that your mind can wrap itself around. But you're afraid to fail. Are you the person who'll find a solution for the persistent problem of world hunger, but you're afraid to fail? Are you the person who will eradicate racism or sexism or homophobia, and the list goes on, but you're afraid to fail? Are you the person who will break our dependency on fossil fuels, but you're so afraid to fail? Perhaps you're the person who is supposed to inspire the next person to do those things, but you're afraid to fail. And being afraid to fail is that you're actually afraid of trying because you are afraid that you will fail. But I ask you today not to be afraid anymore, to come along with me, and don't be afraid. Failure is important. How else will you learn what not to do the next time? Lesson 1. Here I am on my graduation day from graduate school. Look how happy I am. I'm getting flowers, I'm smiling, people are hugging me. Oh, and I'm getting a standing ovation, by the way. It looks very successful, at least by most of our standards. But what if I told you on that day I had come to terms with the fact that I had actually failed? I started out wanting to become a school teacher, and everything that I had done up until that point had prepared me to be a school teacher. There I was as a kid, my parents would say, lining up my stuffed animals, ruler in hand. I went to private school. And so I would be standing there trying to teach these stuffed animals, my kids, how to learn, how to know, knowledge, ABCs, 1, 2, 3. And if they got out of line, I'd use that ruler to help them understand that learning was important. But at that point, I had always prepared, and in preparing, I had never thought I had any other purpose. I had never thought that I could do anything else. And there it was. One day, in front of a class, I realized that I was out of sync with my purpose. Now, I knew that I always wanted to work with young people, and I always wanted to impart learning, if you will. But I realized that I wasn't the best person to be equipped to work with the students that I was working with. And in some ways, I was doing them a disservice by continuing on to participate in teaching them. And I also realized that my purpose was bigger, that I really fundamentally believed that in order for things to change, that I couldn't continue to engage 150 students. Rather, I needed to engage larger groups of people. And so, with great deliberation, I decided to resign from my position at the end of the year and go on ahead and go to graduate school. Now, many people thought I had lost my mind. Many people said, no, you're a great teacher, you have to stay, the students need you, the kids need you. And I was believing some of that myself, that they actually really did need me. And so I said, well, maybe I'll stay, maybe I'll go. But I had this theory, I had this idea that in my purpose, if I went on to get a degree in higher education administration, that perhaps I could work with college students. And in working with college students, maybe those thousands of students that I would have interacted with would then someday go out into the world, whether they were teachers, doctors, lawyers, business persons, social workers, but they would have somehow, because of the work that I was doing, be able to instead impact more numbers than the 150 that I was impacting in that year. And so that's why I left teaching. But it was a very difficult decision for me because I loved the young people. I loved the students, and I loved my subject area. But I needed to fail at teaching to understand that that wasn't what I was supposed to be doing. So on that particular day, with my smile, it wasn't that I was smiling because I was graduating. I mean, I kind of was smiling because I was graduating. But I was smiling because even though I wasn't really sure, I knew that the failure that I had experienced as a teacher was now helping me get to the place that I was supposed to be. In failing, I think it's important to give yourself some permissions. And so I decided that I would write myself a little letter so that I could give myself some permissions to fail, to actually embrace failure, not to take a lot of time trying to worry about failure, to even call myself a failure. And so I did that. What I did is I decided that I'd write myself a letter, and I actually had a nickname as a child, and it was Doc, so I'm not being, big-headed. But it was, hey, Doc, that's a wonderful speech you gave. Now I'm being big-headed. You're really talented. I don't know. Sometimes I want you to learn some things. I want to pass some things on to you. And in that letter, I would talk about those people that we call dream stealers, or in popular lingo, haters. And I remind myself that sometimes those people are haters because they just don't really know their own potential. I tell myself that you'll have a lot of opportunities. Some of those opportunities you'll take full advantage of. That you'll live in lots of really interesting places, Maine being one of them. That you'll get to travel to lots of places. And you'll ride a camel, and the camel will be evil, so to pick another one. I'll also remind myself that I will indeed become successful, at least in the eyes of other people. But I'll also remind myself that, in fact, I will fail, and I will fail miserably. I will fail in trying to get my PhD. That's a story for another day. I'll fail because I'll fall and I'll get a concussion, and that's another story for another day. I'll fail because I'll not get a job, the very job that I have at this very moment. So I'll fail lots of ways. But I'll have to remind myself that those failures were only possible because I chose to try. And in trying, I tried to shoot for the moon, for those things that people said was unattainable because of my background, because of who they thought I was. And in failing to reach the moon, that I actually would fall amongst the stars. And so I still would be able to be successful. I would also think about how it would be that in exploring these different lessons of life, there would be people who come along or stories that I would hear that help to inspire me. So what do you think Thomas Edison, Michael Jordan, and Oprah Winfrey all have in common? They understood the failure of success. It's all in how you look at it. So I've already established that you're going to fail a bunch of times. Well, at least I'm going to fail a bunch of times. I don't know what you're going to do. But in failing a bunch of times, you have to learn to look at it differently. That your failure is your stepping stone to trying and trying again. Thomas Edison, in response to how many times he failed in trying to create his inventions, he said he'd not failed. He just found 10,000 ways that won't work. That's a good way to look at that. Michael Jordan, when he talked about failure, he's failed over and over and over again in his life, and that is why he succeeds. Oprah Winfrey talked about failure as a stepping stone to greatness. This is my grandmother. She's 104 years old, and she's taught me everything I know about failing. Once I asked her, grandmother, because we don't use grandma, grandmother, do you think you're a failure? And the reason why I asked her this question is, in today's terms, she didn't have the cars and the money and all the prestige that many people are seeking in this concept of success. Instead, every single day, she'd put on her clothes and go from door to door on her island and talk to people to identify what things they needed. If they needed food, she'd get it for them. If they needed ministry, she'd help them through that, whatever it was. And my grandmother told me, no, the only failure that I feel that I've ever had is I didn't have enough to give. Math. That's not me, by the way. But the little girl there, she seems so happy about numbers. I'm not that person, never will be, because I believe math is against me. In the concept of failure, sometimes we have to readjust ourselves because sometimes the world is out to get you. More about that another time. I was the person that believed 1 + 1 = 3. I was convinced of it. I even convinced a teacher once to let me go with that concept. And she reminded me that it might very well be 1 + 1 = 3, but in the classroom that she was teaching, it was 2. But my point is that with that, I always had to think about how can I help myself in math. A very quick story, I failed a math course. Ooh, yes, I failed a math course. Actually, what happened is I almost failed a math course. I was failing the class, I was getting Fs over and over again, and finally I decided enough is enough and went to go talk to my high school algebra teacher. She gave me a gift, and she said, here's what we're going to do. If you decide to study the way with me as your tutor, whatever you get on the exam, I'll give you that grade. So that's what I did. Took the test, and I ended up with an A in the course because I got an A on the exam. Now here's the piece. I wish I could tell you that I somehow now miraculously am a math genius. I am not. I continue to struggle through math. But through that failure, I learned how to readjust, how to make sure when something wasn't going the way that I wanted it to go, to make sure that I asked for help, and to make sure that I didn't keep going down the path that was continuing to commit to my failure. I looked at failure as an opportunity for me to dig in and try again. For me, failure is a part of success. The one self-help book that I would say has been the greatest inspiration of my life is a book called Fail Up. This idea of failing up was new to me because I'd always been told, don't fail at all. If you fail, go in a room and hide. Don't tell anybody. It has to be a secret. But in this book, Tavis Smiley talks about the idea that if you have no failure, how could you possibly have success? At least success that's meaningful to you. And so I leave you with this idea. When you fail, all you have to do is to remember to fail up. Thank you.